There are moments in history when you can actually hear the sound of something snapping, not cracking, not bending, snapping, like a dry twig under a boot. And last night at 3:14 in the morning, that sound was 80 years of diplomacy breaking in half because one man couldn't sleep and refused to put his phone down. If you've been keeping score this week, congratulations, because this has been the most exhausting episode of America What Are You Doing ever produced. We've had Davos, where European leaders walked out on the president like he'd just tried to sell them timeshares. We've had the Japanese bond market imploding like a Jenga tower in an earthquake. We've got a literal hole next to the White House where a $400 million ego palace was supposed to go. We've had crowds outside chanting, "Make America Go Away," which, by the way, is a hell of a slogan. And somehow, Donald Trump looked at all of that and thought, you know what this needs? A 3 a.m. meltdown. Because while most presidents are asleep at that hour, or at least pretending to be asleep, Trump was busy rage posting a message so reckless, so arrogant, and so historically stupid that world leaders didn't even bother with their usual diplomatic throat clearing. They went straight to the nuclear option, condemnation, together, immediately, using words you almost never see aimed at the President of the United States. Appalling and false. Those two words might sound polite, but in diplomatic language, they are a slap, a shove, and a restraining order all rolled into one. Let's talk about what actually happened, because this wasn't a normal Trump insult. This wasn't sleepy, this or little that. This was something darker, something imperial, something that made even allies who have swallowed their pride for decades finally say, "No, we're done." At 3:14 a.m., Trump fired off a Truth Social post that reads like it was written by a man pacing around a dark room, watching protest footage on mute, convincing himself he's still the king. In all caps, because of course, he declared that European leaders had begged on their knees for his protection. He called them vassals. Vassals. He said Greenland was mine, not negotiated, not discussed, mine. And then he topped it off by threatening to pull the plug on NATO tomorrow and let the wolves eat them if Europe didn't fall back in line. That's not trash talk. That's a threat. And not just any threat. That's a threat aimed at the foundation of the post-World War II world. Here's why this landed like a bomb. First, the word vassal. Trump probably thought it sounded tough, medieval, powerful. In Europe, that word carries a very specific meaning. A vassal isn't a partner. A vassal is a subordinate, a servant, someone who owes loyalty and military service to a lord in exchange for protection. When you call an elected leader of a sovereign democracy a vassal, you aren't insulting their personality. You're denying their legitimacy. You're telling their voters that their country is owned by someone else. That alone would have been enough to spark outrage. But Trump didn't stop there. He claimed ownership. Greenland is mine, not America's. His. That sentence confirmed every fear Europe has had for years that Trump doesn't see nations. He sees properties, parcels, assets, things you acquire, flip, and put your name on. It turned a ridiculous idea into something far more dangerous. Aggression dressed up as confidence. And then came the NATO threat. This is the one that made people sit up straight. NATO isn't a vibe. It's a legal commitment. Article 5 is the promise that an attack on one is an attack on all. It's the reason Europe hasn't been overrun by Russia, and the reason American troops haven't had to fight another world war on the continent. When the President of the United States threatens to pull the plug on that alliance in a late-night post, that's not negotiation. That's extortion. That's a mob boss saying, "Nice country you've got here. Shame if something happened to it." By sunrise in Europe, the phones were already ringing. And instead of the usual slow, careful diplomatic dance, something extraordinary happened. The United Kingdom, Germany, France, Canada, and Japan released a joint statement at the same time. That almost never happens. These statements are usually massaged to death to avoid hurting feelings. This one didn't bother. It said the president's remarks were appalling and false. It said the United States is an ally, not a master. It rejected the idea of protection rackets. And it flat out denied the claims about Greenland. The message was unmistakable. You don't own us. You don't speak for us. And you don't get to rewrite reality because you're angry. The most shocking part wasn't Germany or France. It was the UK, the so-called special relationship, the country that has stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States through wars, scandals, and some truly bad presidents. When Britain signed that statement, it was the geopolitical equivalent of packing a suitcase and leaving it by the door. Trump didn't just insult a prime minister. He insulted a crown, a history, and a national identity built on the idea that they are no one's vassal. And if you think this is all symbolic, think again. As of this morning, G7 ambassadors are being recalled from Washington for consultations. That's not a press move. That's a relationship move. It means something is broken, and no one trusts the room anymore. Behind the scenes, it's even worse. We're hearing reports that Poland and the Baltic states are discussing invoking Article 4 of NATO. That article is used when a member feels its security is threatened. Usually that threat is Russia. Today they're talking about the United States. Let that sink in. NATO countries are meeting to discuss how to protect themselves from the instability of the American president. If that sounds dramatic, consider the consequences. If NATO collapses, Europe doesn't suddenly become peaceful. It becomes nuclear. Germany starts talking about deterrence. Poland looks for its own umbrella. France becomes the center of a new security order, a nuclear arms race, sparked not by a missile launch, but by a social media post written before dawn. And the financial fallout is already here. Europe is openly discussing economic retaliation. The EU has a tool called the Anti-Coercion Instrument, designed specifically to punish countries that try to bully member states economically. Threatening to cut off security unless they pay up fits that definition perfectly. If the EU pulls that lever, American tech companies get hit first. Digital taxes, procurement bans, regulatory hell. That's why markets are tanking again today. This isn't abstract. This is your retirement account reacting to a man who couldn't sleep. Japan is furious too, and that should scare everyone. Japan holds a massive chunk of U.S. debt. If they decide to send a message by dumping treasuries, interest rates explode. Mortgages die. Housing freezes. All because Trump wanted to feel powerful at 3 a.m. Back home, the mood has shifted from chaos to something darker. Protesters feel validated. They see the world reacting and think, finally, someone is listening. Inside Washington, serious conversations are happening that people were afraid to whisper before. The 25th Amendment, Section 4, Incapacity, Delusion, Risk. Is a president who claims imaginary deals, threatens global alliances on social media, and isolates himself from advisors capable of discharging his duties? That question is now being debated by people with real power. And the silence from the vice president is deafening. No defense, no cleanup, no interviews, just quiet calculation. Inside the White House, leaks describe a man who feels betrayed by everyone. By Europe, by donors, by voters. Surrounded by loyalists who tell him what he wants to hear. Sir, it was strong. Sir, they deserved it. That feedback loop is dangerous because it means he won't walk it back. He'll escalate. A cornered narcissist with nuclear codes is not a punchline. It's a global risk. And while all of this is happening, look east. China is watching, smiling, hosting summits, signing deals, showing the global south a contrast. Stability versus chaos. Respect versus insults. Trump just handed Beijing its greatest propaganda gift ever. They don't have to argue America is declining. They just have to replay his words. The irony is brutal. In trying to assert dominance, Trump has made America weaker than it has been in generations. He alienated allies. He validated enemies. He shattered trust built over decades, all in one night. You can't unring this bell. You can't call world leaders vassals and then apologize your way back into partnership. The damage is done. The world heard him, and they believed him. As of right now, we're waiting to see if ambassadors physically leave Washington. If that happens, it's the formal end of the Western alliance as we know it. We're waiting to see if the vice president breaks his silence. But one thing is already clear. The era of unquestioned American leadership didn't end with a war or a treaty. It ended with a tweet. Appalling. And false. Those words will follow this presidency forever. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of what happens next, because if the last 5 days have taught us anything, it's that the unthinkable is now just another night online.